Hello, everybody. Hi, Michael Gurian here. With such a pleasure to introduce Troy Kemp. So Troy is going to tell you more about himself. Of course, he's coming to us from Chattanooga, Tennessee. CEO, still CEO. Are you
Yes,
CEO,
sir.
Troy? Yep, CEO. He's going to tell you all about it. Troy is speaks all over. So he and I met many years ago when he was still at Macaulay school. And so I'm thinking it's 15 years now, maybe. Uh, what do you think? Somewhere like that?
Somewhere like that.
Yeah. And we immediately hit it off. I mean, Troy is just an amazing person and does amazing work. And we worked together on a number of projects over the years. And now Troy is going to tell you where he is now, because he was at Ron Clark Academy, where he is now, and his incredible work he's doing now. And then going to get into his subject. And then we will take some questions at the end. So, Troy, take it away. Everyone's in for a treat.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gurian. Thank you, Dr. Fletch. I mean, this is a great opportunity, and life is a journey, and there's some challenging things that have happened for me. I found myself in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a year ago today. I would have never thought so, but because I was at Ron Clark Academy, traveling and speaking, educating educators about boys, and just doing some different motivational things around loving life in so many ways. And all of a sudden, my daughter, she's been married for 8 years. She has an 8 year old, a 6 year old, and a 2 year old. And she's a nurse. So she gets into CRNA school in University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Everything's going well. She's got in a scholarship. Her husband played in the NFL for 8 years and he got injured. So now he's getting paid because of his injury and he earned his pension. And so they didn't have to work at all. She can be a full-time student, three boys. Well, in the last 8 to 10 months, their marriage went absolutely south. It was very difficult for a while, but all of a sudden, it literally he struggled once he stopped playing football. They said that there was a gap there, and I think getting used to being evaluated constantly by coaches and cut from different teams, you start looking at life that way in some ways, and it didn't work out. They ended up getting a divorce, and so my daughter was saying, she said, "Dad, I won't go to school in Chattanooga if." It's fine. She was already a nurse, but CRNA, she's doing nurse anesthesia. That's a whole different level. I said, yes, you are. You're going to finish. And we thought about trying to help her get a nanny to get her through, but she's got three boys. I mean, the ones we're talking about that will fill up this screen. And so we just, I looked at it and because mom and dad didn't really get along and they had to have a little distance, legally distance from each other. I just sat back and I said, I spent my life's work working with boys and understanding what a vision for manhood is like and being able to have a consistent role model, all the things that we're talking about. I was like, this is just another one of those lightning strike moments that said, hey, you got to decide right now. And so I talked to Ron Clark and Kemp Bearden, and they're like, hey, why we understand. We'd love to have you continue work with us and speak at the school, but this is a different kind of duty that called. And for me, I didn't hesitate, took over two all boys schools, one in Chattanooga, one in Knoxville. Chattanooga Prep and Knoxville Prep came in, literally had to rebuild it from scratch, had to turn around both schools. They weren't in that shape when we started, but there were some things that had not been discovered in terms of how they were led. And literally the schools almost closed. And so it was a really divine intervention on this level because here's my daughter needing to have that kind of support. And here are two schools that needed the same support. And here's my life work getting put into actions. Y'all, we know how it goes. There's research and then there's reality. And the reality side of this thing is really the piece, the intersection of research and reality is where I live right now. And so I'm thankful that my journey, no matter how challenging it was in some ways, prepared me for this type of moment. So I'm going to share my slides. I'm gonna move around. I'm going to make sure I leave some room for some questions at the end. I'm a bit of a talker. I get excited, y'all. Not Baptist, so just you understand it is Sunday, so we're gonna get to it. Let's go. All right. Can y'all see my screen? Okay. I just want to make sure y'all can see my screen because it gets crazy. All right. So again, I'll come back to that at the end. That's really not the thing. But I want to talk about fathering, mentoring, and educating boys. And I do understand that there were sessions on, like, for example, authentic fathering and things of that nature. So some of these might overlap a little bit, but really everybody's story is a little bit different. And so I want to just share it from the ground up, y'all. And I had a moment, and I challenge you to do this as well if we were live or we really get to it. But one of the things that I think about is Rushmore. When you think about Mount Rushmore, when you think about it, these are sort of the architects of the country. You know, other people can say, well, somebody else should be on this list, but this is what we have, right? And when you think about Rushmore, I think it's very important um, to think about your own Rushmore. I think about myself. How did I end up here? And it was some instrumental people because I'm trying to finish my book. I'm going to finish it real quick. But, you know, at the end, it's like, who are the people you want to thank? And y'all, I can tell you this right now. I have at least 15 people. My Rushmore would be crowded. We just have to have some smaller heads on there because we would have to make it like, because I had a lot of people. But there's some people that don't have a one. They can't even they don't have one face that they can put on there. And so some of the things that we're seeing right now is a direct result of that. So I'll tell you about an unusual suspect on my Rushmore, and you would never guess it. No one would guess it. The most influential person in my life. This guy, August 17th, 1991. That's my son. And my son changed my life, y'all. He changed my life because I grew up in a single parent household. I grew up with a was a I grew up with my aunt raised me. My mother was in college when I was born. My aunt raised me in New York because she had a husband and a stable family. My mother was trying to finish school because she was one of the first in her generation to go to college. And by the time I was 2 years old, when my mother graduated, I was already calling my aunt mama. So there was a little bit of tension there as to what's best for the child. And my mother actually said, what's best for my child is to be raised by my aunt, and I will see him whenever I can. Because she graduated from college, but she was still doing migrant work. My mother went to 5 different schools in fifth grade. And she said, I'm not doing that to my child because that's where the work is. Just because you have a degree doesn't mean you're ready. My mother was actually a teacher for a bit, but she went to one of the worst districts in Miami and it got really hostile. And she said, I got to get out of this and I'll go back to migrant work because that's actually easier to do than to work in this school. That tells you about teaching, right? In some way, in some places. So my son changed my life because, you know, everybody talks about what it means to be a man. They usually tell you what it means when you're not. They're like, be a man. People say that to you, but they never tell you what it means to be a man. They just tell you you're not acting like one. You're not. And what are the things that when they say be a man or man up, they usually say if you're doing something wrong according to their standards, and it gets confusing because it's usually something that causes you to puff out your chest a little more. So the real question is when my son was born, that was the day I became a man. It didn't matter what age I was, it shifted my mindset. And so it made me think about this, y'all. And I'm gonna get to it, and I do it a little bit differently than some, I guess. But here's what I thought about. When we talk about fathering boys, I'm gonna start with that real quick, just to button up a few things. If a boy or your son asks you what it means to be a man, what would you say? What would you say? Because no matter what you say, somebody's not going to agree with you. And where are you going to find it on AI? What are you going to do? Right now, AI might give you a definition, but you got to be careful. Well, at the end of the day, I thought about it because it made me really understand. It was about creating a vision, a destination. Your fathers try to create a blueprint and a vision for where are we going with this? What's the end game like in terms of what's the process? And it's not like some organizations and some countries and some communities where there's a 13-year-old does certain thing in order to become a man. When you ask boys, oftentimes they're sitting there going, I'm not sure. But it's usually something that I do that's difficult because when they try to feel like they're being a man. So one of the things that I just said, I'm gonna just come up with one and I'm gonna ride with this one and see if it comes. Because I'm working with boys. Boys always says, you know, man, someone who takes responsibilities for his actions, his choices, and the people he impacts. He does what needs to be done, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching. Now you look at that, you could put that on almost any gender, but you also have to look at it, it's associated with character and a standard. And so when I think about my son, how he changed my life, he made me move in this way, regardless of what I thought. And then I broke it down because the teacher of me says, let me make a little chart here because I'm working on these boys at Chattanooga Prep and Knox Prep because they're asking that question. Some have dads, some don't. But everybody knows you need more than your dad, even if you have a father in the house. It's not something you claim, it's something you prove by the way you live, right? Where's the receipts, the evidence for it? Boys seek comfort Men act responsibly. Boys react, men respond. Boys blame, men build. And I think when I looked at that and I said, okay, I had to get real clear. If I were to operate by those standards, because it's not about my ceiling, it's about my floor. My floor is my standard. You can't go lower than your floor. So in this process of being a father, I was trying to basically establish for my son, what would your floor be like in terms of things? But more importantly, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Because I didn't have a model for it. And I just kind of actually women were the most influential people in my life if I put my Rushmore together because they loved me unconditionally. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna have to borrow part of the playbook from some people I never knew intimately, but I'm gonna listen to the experts. That's why people like, Dr. Gurian and Farrell, all of you in my life and these educators, I just said, who are the best men I know? And let me hitch a ride with them for a while. And to be the best I could for my son. And so I have a list here just of a few things that I want to share. You know, being present and being engaged. Now, this may have been repeated, but really being present doesn't mean being engaged. It means that you are actively participating because a lot of men where I come from said, I'm watching my kids. And then Uncle TV's on all day, and all they do is video games and TV. But they're not actually participating in homework. They're not struggling with their kids. Kid doesn't, a lot of parents will say, go read. Well, how about read with your child? That's why I made sure, even with I did it even more with my grandsons, is I sat down, I stopped and I read with them. Because they need to see men love to read. I enjoy the story, but I'm really saying, whatever you need, I'm going to be that for you. Showing love without conditions. Now, I'm going to double up on this one, y'all. Men specialize in things we like, but we're limited on things we love and people we love. We can like a lot of things. Like is temporary, right? We can decide, hey, I'm going to like this today and then turn my back on it tomorrow. But there's a commitment, there's a certain level of vulnerability that you have to have when you love. And in order to teach your child that, you have to demonstrate that as well. And so, again, being able to express love when there's no performance. I don't love you because you scored a touchdown. I love you before you go play the game. That's a difference. It's the order of operations when it comes to with sons and fathers is because usually there's a thing that shows up on the scoreboard of life, and then I get a reward from that. Love can't be a reward. Unconditional love is not a reward for something. That is how I feel about you, regardless of your performance. Clear boundaries and expectations. I can tell you this. I did learn this clear boundaries, but you have to also make sure that the boundaries, some have to be dotted instead of solid. Because you sometimes with parents, you set yourself up for success. I mean, for failure. For example, if you do something wrong, I'm going to take your cell phone. Well, you take their cell phone, and the problem is you can't reach your child for the rest of the day. You do something wrong, I'm going to take your car keys. So you take their car keys, now you tote them around, and you're the Uber for the rest of the week. So some of the things you have to play it forward a little bit and say, is this consequence or is this boundary, is this expectation reasonable? I changed the expectation for my child because I changed it for my team. Here's my expectation for my kids. Be tired and proud every day. End your day tired and proud. End your day tired because you did the best you could. End your day proud because you did it for someone other than yourself. You're those two things. It doesn't matter because goals and expectations should be aspirational, but also attainable in some way. And sometimes we set goals or we set expectations that are not attainable, but you just like, well, if I put it up high enough, they're going to reach for the sky. And then the kids feel defeated um, right before they even start. Another thing is, I learned this. I don't know if it's on a podcast, but TNT. I'll talk about this in teaching as well. TNT. TNT stands for takes no talent. It's very important to praise your kids and to be proud of them, particularly the boys, for things that don't require um, talent. So I was talking to some boys in the cafeteria the other day because they were saying, "Well, AI can do everything for us. Why should we work so hard?" And I basically said, my son would say things like, "Dad, look at you. It doesn't matter if I lift weights because I'm gonna be fine later on. You can't outwork Mother Nature." That's what my son would say to me. And I said, okay, so what kind of things are important that don't take talent? Being a good friend, listening, being respectful, being kind, being on time. whatever the standard is, meeting that standard, because if it doesn't require talent, then you should have 100 in that, a 10 out of 10. And I'm going to praise those things because that reinforces the growth mindset as well, because it's effort and attitude driven. If not, and all you're doing is praising the scoreboard, then your child, all they're going to be looking for is another way to score. And if they can't, they'll opt out. That's the piece. So if you build it on the effort, growth mindset, but TNT is critical. And that actually flows into the classroom as well. I'll share that, but hang on to that one. This is huge. They say that a boy's image of himself is what he thinks his father or father figure thinks of him. And I learned that the hard way. I'll tell you a story in a second. But what I learned pretty quickly is to try coaching before correcting. And I coached my whole career, so it was easy. But sometimes with your own kid, you're harder on them, right? Because you know their threshold. You have a bond with them that's different. But really, here's the classic case. Your child comes home and makes an 85 or 90. You said, you did really good, but, yeah, but that is one of the enemies to the relationship that you have with your child because they're going to hear the but. They're not going to hear the yeah. So what I usually tell parents, and this is the easy part, especially dads, because again, that you're the hero. This child's looking at you as the model, right? If my child does something and they need to do something better, I'll say, did an amazing job on this. I may make to wait till the next day to do the but. Yeah, today, but tomorrow. I promise you, just separating it because you have to give them a chance to absorb the sun rays before you put the cloud in front of it. That's how they fit because they'll say, well, you always criticizing. But separating yeah, but has been very, very important. Being affectionate, giving them permission to feel. This is something my brothers, it's crazy because my brothers, we took a photo the other, during Thanksgiving because we were just, my mom couldn't make it from New York, but my mom from Florida, my real mom was there. We were all there. So we taking this picture. And I said, let's go outside and take a picture. So it's all of us. It's the six of us, five boys, one girl. We're rarely in the same place. We go to take a picture, and all the guys are in the picture like this. I said, you're taking a picture for your mama, man. Won't you smile? And my one brother, he would not smile no matter what. We always talk about boys have to have permission to cry. They have to have permission to smile too. You got to make it safe for them to express themselves. That's the biggest challenge. And so for dads, make it safe for them to express themselves because the time you don't, that becomes the rule, not the exception. And I can tell you now, it's easier to be a 50-year-old dad than it is to be a 45 or 30-year-old dad because I cry for nothing now. I watch any movie, it could be a cartoon, and I'm crying. But you know what I realized when I analyzed my tears? That I feel safe. My tears are not a threat. My tears were a threat in my neighborhood. They're not a threat to me. That's why it's important to create a safe environment, psychologically safe for your child, giving them permission to smile as well as permission to cry. And if they don't ever see their dad smile, what do you think? They're going to sit up there and smile? No, because that's critical. Now, I got something for you. I'm going to do a couple scenarios because I'm going to roll through this, but I hope this is okay, y'all. I ain't done virtual in a long time. All right, here we go. Let me give you a scenario right here. And you can put this in the chat box if you want to participate. So imagine a father has his son. He's coming out of the grocery store. He didn't want to go in the first place. So he's coming out of the store. He's got some ice cream because there's a party for the other child, but he got the little one with him. And the little one, the cart's full, hot, 95 degrees. He's trying to make it to the car. The little one doesn't want to hold his hand. What happens? Well, where I'm from, that thing would have gotten real, real fast. My dad might have popped me, or my mama would have popped me before I went in the store. She said, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to give you the rules before you go in here. And then back in the day, there would have been a whole lot of, popping and jumping and skipping going on. Well, that's the interesting thing because I had someone call me and ask me about that. Said, my kid don't want to hold my hand anymore. That joke was crazy. And I said, no. I said, why do you think they don't want to hold your hand? It's not because they don't want to hold your hand, they don't like you or anything. They're trying to prove themselves. I said, okay, how about trying this? So instead of using Kung Fu, and Kung Fu is like you throw a brick against a brick wall, you damage the brick or you damage the wall or both. And that's the friction that we create trying to solve a problem. Often we create another problem. I said, how about using Tai Chi? I said, Tai Chi is if you take a brick and you throw it against a blanket, you still stop the brick, but you don't damage the blanket. So the whole notion is more Tai Chi, less Kung Fu when it comes to being a father. So here's a Tai Chi move for that child. So instead of grabbing their hand and yanking them by the arm, I swear I think one of my arms longer than the other one because my mama held me by that right arm a few times, I ain't gonna lie. And if you're laughing, they got yours too. But here's the point. The point is, you ask the child, you said, hey, this parking lot's dangerous. Can you help me get to the car? The child grabs your hand and walks you to the car. And they might even ask, can I help someone else? So the point is, when you tap into what they need, that's going to be critical because often we look at a power trip about who's in charge, and it's not about who's in charge. You're the child's parent, but sometimes as fathers, we compete with the kid because it's my house and it's my way or the highway. But unfortunately, I've seen too many kids take the highway, including my brother, and he ended up locked up by the time he got a half a mile down the road. So that can't be the solution as much as most people think. Couple other things, examples of excellence. So a lot of times we try to explain, and as men, we forget that we have a standard, but it took us a while to create the standard. So I remember telling my son to go clean his room, and he took an hour to clean his room. And when I went to his room, it looked worse than it did when I told him to go clean it up. So I'm like, how did this kid get? I colored inside the lines as a kid. My son was classified as funky and junky. So I told my son, I go in the room and I'm hot because my mama, she was a kung fu mom. If I had not had my room clean, I might still be in there right now, according to my mama. But I walked up there and I saw my son and I saw him on there. He was playing with something that he found because he lost it because it was underneath some stuff that he should have cleaned. So all of a sudden he's on the bed playing with something that he lost. And I said, son, I'm thinking kung fu because I was raised by kung fu. I'm a kung fu dad. I said, I'm using Tai Chi because I'm not going to jail today. I'm going to try something different. So I gave him a timer and I said, I need you to time me. So he has the timer. And now I said, I need you to time how long it takes to clean your room. So I clean his room. I put the shoes in the closet. I match the shoes, match them up so you can find them later. You know that shirt on the floor? When you hang it up, button two hangers, button two buttons so it won't fall back down on the ground. And by the way, I go over to his bed and I'm like, what's going on with his bed? So his bed is against the wall, but his mattress is on a 45-degree angle. So his mattress is hanging off over the bed, and the bed is straight. And I'm like, where's this space where your I said, how are you sleeping on the bed? Now, my son's like 10 years old. I said, how are you sleeping on this bed with this space? And why do you have this space over here? What is that? He said, that's my snack crack. My son had a space on the side of his bed he called a snack crack, a little wedge where he could put items. And I said, he wasn't wrong. He came up with a solution. But what I did is I pushed that snack crack over. And when I finished his room, one, he knew how long it took. Two, I modeled how to do it. Three, I took photos of his bed, his desk, his floor, his trash can, his closet, and I stuck it on the wall. And I said, the next time I ask you to clean your room, it needs to look like this. And what that means is a technique with kids to make sure, and educators need to do this as well, is show them an example of excellence. What does excellence look like? It's not just a rubric. Instead of me translating my language, I want to speak his. He needed to see what a clean room, what the standard looked like. So again, as a dad, I learned that pretty quickly. I said, am I being clear? Another thing, boundaries with choices are very good when it comes to fathers with boys because fathers, we say set clear boundaries, but you also have to think about choices because great leaders share power. They give away power. And great fathers do the same thing because you're raising a son that you want to be independent in that way. And as well as when we talk about fathering any child. So I remember my son, I'll tell you two quick stories. One, my son, I said, you have to play sports. You got so much energy. You have to play sports all the way through middle school. When you get high school, you can choose. So we get to the winter times, basketball season and wrestling season. He's like, my dad, I don't play basketball. I said, I guess it's going to be wrestling. He's like, I don't want to wrestle. I don't want to wrestle. I said, okay, you got a choice. Wrestling practices right now. We're going down there. So here's your choice. Your choice is you can either walk in the room or I'm going to carry you in the room. Which way you want to go? He said, I'll walk. He walks in the room, but I can tell you this. My son's favorite thing to talk about is his days of wrestling. See, sometimes you just got to know they were just afraid and they're not sure and it wasn't their choice. Yeah, you had a choice on how you're going to walk in the room. But what I scaled it up is when my son, whenever he would do something that wasn't appropriate, and I said, okay, we got to fix this. I would say to him, all right, I got a plan to get this fixed. Your mom has a plan to get this fixed. I'm going to give you 12 hours to come up with a better plan. If you come up with a better plan, or if you got one right now, tell me what it is. Because if it is your plan and it's really good and it's going to change the thing, then we're going to run your play. And honestly, there's several times they usually tend to be more harsh about what they say to do than you, but it's fair to them because they came up with the rule, right? And I can tell you something that's really interesting is that the same thing is true with teaching. I'm gonna skip a little bit, but whenever I've had kids, when I had to write an interim home to the parents about performance, I would usually give a boy a chance to write his own first. I said, I want you to write a letter to your mom or your dad. And I want you to write about at least 3 sentences of what you did and what you're doing to fix it. And then I'm going to co-sign and add something at the bottom, but you're going to be the first author. One, I'm not surprising them with a message home to the parents. Two, mama, dad, they read it and they go, what's their goal? Their goal is to get it fixed. And the boy is already saying, I'm already meeting with Mr. Kemp. I'm going to go, I've already gone to extra help and I've already corrected my test and I've done these things. Mama, she's so mad, she want to hug him, right? So it offsets the parent because really you're asking what's the goal. And then the other thing as a dad, and this is something we got to be careful of because I worked at a boarding school and we had all these dads said, I'm not through raising my son. So I don't want him to go away to boarding school because I'm not through raising my son. I said, this is first of all for kids who want to be here. And this is the partnership. I can never replace you as a dad. But when I coached my son, I remember he's an All-American, hardest job I've ever had in my life is when coaching my child. And I remember sometimes we'd be in a game. He's an All-American. He was one of the top players in the country. But I remember sometimes I'd have to take him out of the game because he's acting up. He's short-circuited. Somebody got to him and he's acting up. And so I'd take him off the field, but I wouldn't talk to him. I'd send him right down to one of my other coaches. I said, Coach Roby, fix him, man. Let me know when he's ready. Because if I talked to him, he'd hear his dad on the sideline criticizing him. And I wanted to be able to critique him like a coach. So I said, Roby, get him in a good place. Let me know when I can talk to him. The second thing is my son quit my team. He's an All-American player, but he quit my team because he was a boarding student and I took his phone and he fell in love. He had a girlfriend. He fell in love. And so that's a whole nother story. But fell in love, I took his cell phone. And because his grades dropped, because he was going to UNC and he had to keep his grades up. He said, Dad, my grades are higher than the coach's standards. I said, this is a Kemp standard, not a UNC standard. But anyway, he said, why'd you take my phone? I said, it's a distraction. He said, lacrosse is a distraction. So my son takes the phone. So he says, so what you going to do? He said, I'll quit. Now think about this. I'm head coach and dad. My son's a senior and he quits my team. Now, Dad, what do? We stand ground. You ain't going to be more man than me. You can go ahead and quit. I don't care. And then I'm his coach. And I'm like, I don't even know what to say because I'm his dad. So one of the most powerful things that a dad can do is have to activate your network. Don't be challenged because your son has a better relationship or a different relationship with a different male. Like it's not a threat. I need 10,000 males to be in my child's life. I'm not threatened that somebody's a better dad than me or a better influence. Hey, there's a reason why kids take the trash out over their friend's house and they don't take it out of their house, right? There's a thing of the credibility of the mentor, right? So all of a sudden, my son quit the team, and I reached out to one of my best friends who he really respects and he loves, and I said, Coach, I said, man, this joker quit the team. I don't know what to do. He's the best player. It's gonna be hard to win without him, but I don't care. I'd rather lose than deal with this. He said, let me talk to him. Then he comes back to me later. He said, you know, your son didn't want to quit. He just wanted to hurt you because you hurt him by taking that phone. So now I said, how am I going to fix this? So I go back to the other kids on the team, the seniors. I said, y'all want him back? They said, yes, sir, we want him back. I said, okay, I got to go try to fix this. So I sit down with my son, no lie. I put my son in one chair and I put two other chairs on the opposite side. And I said, okay, son, I'm going to talk to you like your father. So I sat down in chair number one and I said, you know, as your father, I said, you can't, this is something different. This has nothing to do with that team. And I've never taught you to ever quit on somebody. You and I, we want to deal with something. Let's deal with it on this level. Let's figure this out. But quitting on a team, you're leaving those guys behind, and that's not fair to them. Then I got up and sat in this chair as his coach. And I said, man, I don't know what's going on between you and your dad, but that needs to be left over here because this is the team. It has nothing to do with me and these guys. So you got to divide and conquer here. You got to deal with your dad on another level. But as a coach, they need you, man. So I had to kind of talk as two different people. No lie. I sat in two different chairs to kind of divide it up. And he rejoined the team. But it was a thing that was one of the hardest things to do because check my ego. And y'all, one of the things that I can tell you that's not on my list is as a man, if you're trying to raise a child, especially a son, you got to deal with your own stuff. You got to unpack your bag because one of the challenges with a lot of men is that you got to carry on with funky, dirty laundry, and then you give it to your child and say, pack your stuff in here, never take it out. You have to unpack your bags first before you pack their bags with weighted, funky laundry. That thing. I'll tell you one more story. And I'm going to move to the mentor part. I promise you. I hope this is helpful, y'all. So, one of the things that I learned with my son is that, again, being his dad and his mentor and his coach, and all of his friends looked up to me. So, it had to be impossible for him. I'll never forget, I told you he fell in love. And once he fell in love, prom night, his senior year, this was bad news, y'all. He was living in the dorm, but all of a sudden he said, Dad, tonight, can I stay at home instead of the dorm? Now, we lived on campus. We lived 100 yards from the dorm. I said, yeah, but your curfew is the exact same curfew as the other boys. He said, never mind, I'll stay in the dorm. I said, he just wanted to stay out late. You know that prom night thing, right? I said, no, sir. You got into UNC early admission. I'm getting you to the doorstep of Chapel Hill, buddy. We ain't messing this up. So I said, so he goes at prom night. So he goes, and then all night I had a great group of seniors. They were a nationally ranked team. So I'm texting the boys all night. I found like 2 eyeballs on Google and I copied and pasted them into the text messages like this. And I'm like, I'm watching you. I'm watching you. Be a good guy. So I'm texting boys all night, trying to make sure that they overcome that prefrontal cortex and say, be a good guy. Let's make it. We can make it. We can make it. So I'm up all night till about 3:30 in the morning. I go to sleep and I finally go to sleep. And now all of a sudden, 5:15 in the morning, my wife gives me that razor sharp elbow. Joy, wake up. I said, what? I don't think TJ stayed in the dorm last night. And I said, what? He didn't stay in the dorm. I'm an administrator. If he sneaks off campus, he can get kicked out of school. He's about to graduate. This is catastrophic. I said, no, he didn't do that. He didn't do that. She said, I'm telling you. I said, how you know? She said, I saw on social media his girlfriend had a hotel room downtown. I said, oh my gosh, he's shacking up. This is bad news, man. I ain't not gonna make it. So I literally go over to his dorm room. I got the master key and I open the door and I look in there. I see his whole suit. Nobody. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I get on the phone and I call him. I ring my phone. Next thing you know, he picks up the phone. I said, boy, where are you? He said, Waffle House. I said, which Waffle House? Click. I said, oh, he hung up on me. Oh, this ain't no good. So I'm red hot. Tai Chi, no Tai Chi. This is Kung Fu right now. So now all of a sudden I go back home and I told my wife, I said, he's not there. He's not there. Like what we gonna do? And she says, I'm telling you he's downtown. So I get in my car and I start driving downtown. I call him again. This fool answers the phone again. My daughter would have never answered the phone. That's how you can tell boys are different. He answered. I said, how'd you get to Waffle House? He said, well, my girlfriend, she gave me a ride. She came in. You know, they say the rules say at 5 o'clock, it's a brand new day. So all you have to do is sign out and then you can go anywhere you want. And I had to tell that old parental lie. I said, I checked and I didn't see anybody on the video surveillance for the school. He clicked, hung up again. I said, oh my. So I'm driving and I finally get down to the hotel. I pull in, the valet guys, he goes get the car. I said, do what you want to do with it. So I run in there. Now my mama would have been kung fu. She would have ran into that front desk, boop, 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 boop. And I said, I can't do that. I'm a school administrator, so let me be nice. And I said, okay. So I go down to the bottom of the elevator. It's only 2 elevators. And I'm sitting there in a chair and I call him again. He answers the phone again, y'all. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So he answers. I said, boy, I know you're upstairs. Get down here right now. Don't say a word. Just come on. He comes down the stairs. He walks back to me. Here's what I learned as a dad, too. Be still. I didn't say anything because I can't take it back. You got to show discipline in the toughest moment if you want your child to show discipline. You got to model what you practice, what you preach, right? Poignant. He goes to the car. So now I'm driving home. It's silent in that car. I don't have nothing on. It's Sunday, too. And I said, I usually have a gospel on. I ain't got nothing on. I'm driving home. I get to the house. I pull up in the yard. My wife's in the air like this. I said, hold on. She said, what? I said, you can't do nothing. She said, what? I said, hold on, you told me to go get him. So let me deal with him. You can have what's left over. She said, okay. So I sent him upstairs. I said, get dressed. We're going to church. See, I grew up in the church, y'all. I grew up because fourth down, punt to the Lord right now because I ain't got it in me. I said, I got to get something. So everybody said, we going to church and figure this out. So he said, Dad, can I get something to eat? I said, I thought you went to the Waffle House. So no, so we drive down, so we get down to the church and we pull in and he goes in, he tried to go up top and to the back. You know, people just go up to the back. I said, no, no, no. I need you in that second row. That first row for the deacons, you get in the second row because I want some oil and sweat on you because we got to do something with this word. So we get in there, no lie. The sermon is on forgiveness. I said, oh man, in this moment, is this what we're doing now? So I said, okay. So we get out of church. We go to the parking lot. He tries to get in the car. I don't unlock it. I hit the beep. And he get ready to lock. I lock it back. He's like, my dad's gonna kill me in the church parking lot. So I walk over to him and I give him a hug and I say, I forgive you. I said, I forgive you. He starts crying. He's bawling, crying. He said, whoa, what, man? He said, well, I said, what are you crying for? He said, Dad. He said, man, I'm sorry. He said, you always right, man. You right, you right. I know you right. He said, man, I said, what are you talking about? I'm always right. He said, Dad, you always right because you're perfect. I said, I failed you, man. What I learned, the biggest lesson about dads is that you have to lead with some level of transparency. Because if they think you're perfect, their standard or remember the vision that they have for themselves is what they think you think of them. And if you are perfect, all my son saw me do is win. He didn't see me struggle. So when you ask your son to go do something that's difficult, go do it with him. It might be something that's hard for you as well. Well, my son never saw the process. He saw the cake come out of the oven. He didn't see me mixing it. And so I realized with my son is that he said, Dad, you're a champion. You win everything. You won all these state championships. If we lost, it wasn't your plan, it was our execution. And so he never saw me as someone that could ever fail. And I said, that's where I failed you. So I would encourage anybody that's in a father role to make sure that you are transparent. You don't have to tell all your business, but you need to be authentic about you. If something's hard for you to do, maybe you know what's hard for me to do? Apologize. I was in a store. Right after that, I was in the store and my wife got me mad, because I booked the hotel room and I got the right price that I thought I didn't want to pay it, but I paid it. And when I booked it, it was non-returnable, non-refundable. As soon as I did, she said, I could have found you a better price. So she went online, click, 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 and found another room. And I was like, oh my gosh, why'd you do that? So I'm all mad at her, yelling. I go to the store and then I called her from the register and I apologized. I said, I got to apologize. My son was with me. I said, I got to apologize. I said, I was just mad because you found a better price and timing wasn't great, but the lady at the register said, say that again. I said, I apologize. She said, say it one more time. I said, I apologize. I'm talking to my wife. She said, man, I ain't never heard that in my life. Look, if you're going to lead a certain way and you want your child to be a certain way, this is including mentoring. You have to be a model and mainly model the things that are difficult for you. And as a dad, I realized as a person that didn't have a model for a dad, that was the greatest lesson learned because I was thinking that being successful, I was showing him my sword and my shield, but I wasn't showing what I was protecting, that I'm one of the most sensitive people on earth. Boys are sensitive. That's why they are so tough acting, because they don't want you to they can't handle the disappointment. So they're like, I'll opt out before I'm disappointed. So I see that. But let me share this one thing. And this is my son right here. This is the full-blown version of him, right? So I had an opportunity. My son and his wife, fiance, came up to me and they said, would you marry us? And I said, what? I'm not ordained. And I realized in the state of Georgia, just go online, about 5 minutes, I can do it, right? But here's my point. The greatest thing that I learned about being a father was to respect my son. And so this was the thing. Advice, the greatest advice I could ever give was this. I said this to my son, and I actually said it to him when he was going off to college. I said, I've given you advice your entire life. Now you have to ask for it. Let me tell you something. That was probably the most powerful thing I ever said to my son in his whole life because he calls me all the time. By the way, he always answers the phone. I didn't realize it was about that. My wife can call him 10 times. He doesn't answer. Every time he answers it for me, unless his hands are busy doing something else. And I think there's a thing right there, y'all. There's an expectation, a level of respect. But I said, I got to reciprocate that. And y'all, I know I don't have forever to do this, so I'm going to go a little faster on the rest, but I had to get to that because that was the transformational moment right here. Y'all with me? Okay. All right. I got to share this picture because the picture's worth 1,000 words. Y'all, this picture was the 2015 state championship. And this kid in my hands was a boarding student. His name was Tyler Wilkes. And what happened is we won the game 13-11 against an arch rival. We were dead tired. This boy was so tired that when you go to shake hands at the end of the game, he couldn't walk. He was struggling over by the goal, and all the boys were lining up and shaking hands. So I ran over there and picked him up, and I carried him through the line and let him shake hands with everybody. Now, the reason why I share that with you is because that's what mentoring is. There's a level of trust and look, to be a great mentor, to be a great educator, because I'm going to probably combine these two, you got to be two things, relatable and reliable. If you are relatable and reliable, things change. Relatable means I see you, I understand you, I know you by name and need. And reliable means I'm going to show up and I'm going to follow up. But really, really what it boils down to, y'all, is trust. And I'm gonna skip this here because this was a little quiz, but I'm gonna rock with it with y'all because I'm one of those guys. I'm gonna talk to y'all because I got it. So I don't need no slides for this here. Y'all, I walked into a room in Kingston, Jamaica, with a bunch of boys 50 boys that were abused, neglected, abandoned. They were really the ones who were notorious. In fact, the gentleman down in Jamaica says, Mr. Kemp, can you come and speak to these boys? Because if you don't, if someone doesn't intervene, they're going to take some lives. They are the boys that are notorious. They're going to be incarcerated. They're going to murder. They're going to do this. These are the boys. Now imagine if somebody told you to go in that room with 50 boys and they were 13 to 18. What are you going to say to them? The world has kicked them to the curb. So the first thing I did is I showed them a list of things, 10 things about me that may be true, may not be true. I put a little time and gave them a piece of paper and a little timer. And I said, write down the numbers that you think are true. Now, you know, every kid, when you walk in the room, the first thing they're going to do is judge you. They're going to look at you and go, who are you? Are you credible? Should I trust you? Especially these kids. So I put some things about myself, like being homeless, getting suspended from school, not being raised by my mom. My father had 16 kids, things of that nature. They were like, "Whoa, so you like us." So by the time I shared those things, here's the thing about the boys. I knew they weren't going to talk, so I let them write. They need a safe place to participate. This is what teachers do. And I walked around the whole time. As I walked around, that TBWA, teach by walking around. I was engaging them because of proximity motivates, especially boys that have been in high trauma. You want to move slow, not too loud, and don't be too loud. But I moved around and I said, just circle. You don't have to if you don't want to. And guess what? When I revealed the first one, I said, the first answer is true. They were like, yeah. They weren't talking, but they're excited. The second answer is false. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh. But they were engaged. They just weren't talking. So now they're kind of squirming. They're going, what? I said, now the next thing we're going to do is this. I'm going to give you another piece of paper. I want you to write down the word that represents who you are on the outside, what people think of you. And so I took a screen behind me, and I put 25 words, and I said, strong, funny, handsome, all the words that boys typically use to describe themselves. I said, you can pick one of these words or choose your own. And then I said, on the other side, I want you to write down something that describes you on the inside. You never tell somebody, but it's critical to know. And so I put some words up there, and I said, let me give you an example. Mine is on the outside, confident, on the inside, sensitive. They're like, what? So I said, you can put any words you want on here. So I have 25 words, inside, outside words. Well, all of a sudden, I said, write on this piece of paper. And if you write on this piece of paper, then you can ball it up. And I had the big trash can. I said, you can shoot it in the trash can if you write on both sides. So they're like, I'm going to shoot on the trash can. So they wrote the words down. So here's what happened. I wanted to read what they wrote about the inside. So I pull out the paper, the first word, hopeless. Second word, worthless. Third word, hopeless, worthless. Y'all, this is crazy. 50 boys, 36 hopeless, 8 worthless. There's only 6 more in the room. They synced in on those words, y'all, because they were feeling hopeless. But guess what? Once they did that, they started moving around a little bit because they were like, I'm not the only one that feels this way. So now all of a sudden I said, what does it mean to be a good man? And I put respectful over here. I put honest over here. I put good with the ladies. I put rich back here. I put some other stuff. And I said, if you agree with any of those words, go stand in the corner that represents the word. If you have your own word, stand in the middle of the room. So I always gave them an option to choose their own. So some of the kids sat down, they're like, I'm not getting up. All of a sudden, they the last ones, they said, I'm getting up. So they went to a corner in the room. I said, now I'm going to walk over. And I said, if you want to, please raise your hand if you want to share why you chose your word. And I go up to the front in the middle. I choose the random word, your own word. First word the boy says, responsible. He says, a good man needs to be responsible for his actions, responsible for his family. All this stuff that we try to preach to these kids. Now they're saying these kids are going to tear up the country, but they know exactly what it is. Because another one says reliable. Another one says accountable. These kids are using the words that we teach them so they know. But the real question is, why aren't they doing it? And here's what I learned pretty quickly, because this is the same with educators and mentors, y'all. It's not the fuel, it's the friction. Y'all, there's 4 reasons why people don't change. 1, they think they're good enough. 2, they think it's going to take too much work to change. 3, they don't trust the person who's sharing the advice. And 4, it wasn't their idea. Well, the one that you can always take a basketball team, make them play hard about playing a better team. That's how you can get the one who thinks they're good enough. The one that thinks that it's going to be too much work, you show them how much work it saves, right? but really the one is the trust because they're buying in. My dad used to say this. My mom says this. The community, the culture says this. So they're going to have to learn how to trust you. And one of the things that I learned as a great educator, this is the number one thing that an educator has to have. And I made a little chart right here. So I'm going to put it on the screen. Now, there's all kinds of ways to build trust. One way to build, these are 5 things that have been true in my world. Being super clear about expectations, being super clear because they know where the boundaries are. They know where the lines and the lanes are, but they also know what you're expecting of them. When you're real clear about the expectation, they can gauge that. They can respond to that. That's why I rather use calendars than lists sometimes because they know, my son, I said, listen, I need to have this by 2 o'clock on Wednesday. Oh, we're going to get it. When I communicate in leadership roles with my team, real clear. You know what my clarity was? My clarity was this. I said, leadership is about service. So I said, you know what? We're not electing captains to the end of the season. All the seniors, you're going to carry the water. All the seniors, you're gonna serve the team. You're gonna clean up the locker room. And at the end of the year, we're gonna vote on which senior actually did the most in terms of serving the team. So being real clear about those things. Credibility is when you're spending the time doing the work to know who you're dealing with. A lot of times we teach kids and we mentor kids that don't look like us. So what's the credibility? Some kids, if you don't know what lemon pepper seasoning is, you better find out. Trust is like potato salad, y'all. You can put potato salad on the table, and the first thing somebody's gonna say is, "Who made this?" And then if the right person ain't made it, they ain't eating it. They'll walk right past it. They could be hungry, starving, and they ain't touching that potato salad. Am I right? Same thing. So just think, trust like potato salad. If you don't forget nothing else. But then the credibility is again, did I do the work? So my work and working on how boys learn best, even coaching. I wasn't a lacrosse coach growing up. I didn't play lacrosse, but I joined the summer league. I went to coaching clinics. I wanted to stay ahead because I want to always add value. Credibility is also how do you expect to grow growth mindset if you're not willing to grow yourself? That's the same thing with a father as well. Consistency is the third one. Being consistent is not about your ceiling, it's about your floor. How are you on your worst day? How are you setting a standard for yourself? How you walk, right? Are you different when you're upset than you are when you're calm? Those are the things. Are you always thinking of the big picture or are you getting caught in the weeds? Being consistent is everything. Y'all, I learned this in football when I had to run the 40-yard dash 6 times. And I said, I'm one of the fastest out here. And the coach said, I just want to know if you're fast on the 6 time as you were on the first one. Because football has 60 plays, and if you fast on half of them, they're going to score touchdowns on the other half. And I said the same thing is in life. If you're not consistent, how is somebody going to trust you? If you say you're going to show up and you don't as a mentor, this is why I use a calendar. Your budget and your schedule or your moral document. You put it on the calendar and you do an invite. You got to be clear about that, or they're not going to be able to trust you because a lot of these kids, their lives are full of people that are not consistent. And it could be their father, right? Caring and connection are the last two. And caring, for me, I define caring as this. Y'all, I walked into my charter school and it was on fire. I had to hire 19 people in 6 weeks. It was crazy, including leadership. But I walked in there one day and a young man was in the lobby and he's sitting in there and he's got a piece of paper in his hand and he's going, Mr. Kemp, I'm trying to reach Principal Daniels right now. You know where he is? I said, no, I don't know where he is. I said, but what's going on? He said, well, I got kicked out of detention. Now you get kicked out of detention. I said, okay. So I said, let me ask you this. What's that in your hand? He said, it's a piece of paper. It's my homework. And I said, well, it's your homework. He said, yeah. I said, well, why aren't you doing it? Why are you working on it while you're waiting on the person? He said, well, I don't have my cell phone because we can't have them in school and it's in there, but they'll let me use it for my math. I said, I used to be a math teacher, right? He said, really? I said, yeah, man, let's see what's going on. So I sit down with him and we work on things. And as we're working, I'm trying to get him to explain what he's doing. I said, if your buddy comes around the corner right now, what would you tell him about how to prevent from making careless errors? So I draw these little lines when I distribute things to make sure everybody's like a dealer in cards. I make sure I distribute the number here. He said, yeah. I said, because otherwise, I said, math problems are designed to work, but there are pitfalls. I said, you know what a pothole is? He said, yeah, to mess your rims up. I said, there are potholes in math problems. This is a pothole. So we're talking about pothole. So next thing you know, we do the problem. And I said, you're also taking your work and you're compressing it. Use the whole page. I said, yeah. So now he said, can you give me a harder one? I said, yeah. We do it again. Get a harder one. In 15 minutes, y'all, he went from I can't do it to give me a harder one. See, kids don't need heroes, they need believers. They need people who have a high expectation for them. And caring is about stopping when you need to, showing up for somebody when they least expect you, showing up for them when you don't have to. That's what caring is. And then connection is critical because we always say boys need a crew and a cause. They need to be know that they belong to something bigger than themselves and that they can contribute in a meaningful and measurable way. And I can tell you this: one of the things that I learned pretty quickly about consistency, I mean about crew and a cause, is we launched a house system, which is like the Ron Clark, Harry Potter house system. At our school. And somebody said, you can't do it with high school, you can't do it with boys. Y'all, let me tell you something real quick. And I'm going to share this right here. We had a lot of discipline problems. When we started the year, we had like 700 discipline problems right away. We're grades 6 through 12 in one school. And it was a lot of minor stuff, but it was crazy in the middle school, especially sixth grade, because they were coming in from different schools. Well, long story short, here's what we did. We created a house system, we launched it, and we got the leaders. I found all the most influential mentors in the building to buy into it. And then we had a little thing where we popped these bags and we had these bracelets. And so once they saw, I did the teachers first. So the mentors got up there and they got their colors. So now the kids were like, what's mine? So they did a reveal. So all of a sudden they're holding up the colors. Y'all, they joined gangs to be a part of a crew and a call. So we said, let's give them one. And let me show you a result of this. This is crazy. So in our lobby, we have this leaderboard. And this leaderboard, this is an early snapshot. This is the house system. We had an app that tracks it and all this. But when kids do the TNT stuff, pick up trash, open the doors, be a good friend, show great effort, show up on time, perfect attendance, things of that nature, always prepared, they get points that contribute to their team. So there's 8 fraternities, if you would, and they get points. And guess what? When they get the points, their face shows up on the screen. So in the lobby, in the lunchroom, their face shows up on the screen when their moment happens. And then the next person who contributes in their house, it changes the face. But here's what they're doing. They're getting recognized for not just academic things. They're getting recognized for the TNT things. And they're contributing to a total because they're competing. And we have a school store where they can redeem their points, like for snacks. I mean, you get like 500 points. You can get a pair of J's, some Jordans, stuff like that. But they are killing it. And guess what? Every week we show the top 10 point getters for the whole grade or for the whole school. How about 5 of them are always the kids who are the highest disciplinary infractions? Yo, we reduced our disciplinary infractions by 60% right now. A school that was on fire. We're just meeting the need, knowing these kids by name and need. There's a lot of strategies that educators have. But the crew and the cause is one of the most powerful because when they're contributing to something larger than themselves, they move. Y'all, I got these kids to take class notes. Boys would take some of the worst notes I ever seen in my life. But when I said, you're the note taker for the class, everybody else takes their notes, but you're going to be the official note taker, not copying. Copying is keeping up. Note taking is translating. You're going to take notes just in case somebody's absent, somebody loses their notebook. Those boys start showing up with highlighters and markers and everything because it was their time to protect someone else. And what I'm saying in this whole thing is that we know what they need, but the key thing is to make sure that we leverage it. We leverage what they need to benefit others and measure what we treasure. A lot of times we measure grades, we measure test scores, but are we measuring the TNT, which is the things that are going to help them grow? At home, are we measuring the effort? Are we complimenting the effort? Are we demonstrating the things that are TNT as well? I'll leave you with one last thing, and I hope this is helpful, y'all. I get so fired up. Um, One thing that I'll share with you, the last thing I'll share with you is this, y'all. This is the thing that I would say with parents is a lot of times when kids' grades drop, they take the kids and they take them off the teams. And I would say keep them on the team because remember, they'll chase a football in 95-degree heat, but they won't read in the air conditioning. They volunteered to do something that's difficult. Anytime that's the case, keep them in that lane. Keep them in that space. But what I would say is the last thing I'll say is one time I had a group and we took them to a hotel. It was a lacrosse team. We are traveling and we're in a hotel and all of a sudden the manager comes down and he says, Mr. Kemp, Coach Kemp, I got a problem here. I said, what? He said, there's 18 floors in this building and your guys keep going in the elevator, pressing all the buttons. Right? Mike, I got you. T. Oh, can't finish
We
the
have to
story.
end.
Okay.
We have to
All
end.
right. All right,
No,
I
we have
got
to
you. I
end
got you.
just because we only have a few minutes, then we start the next. But
Oh, I
wow,
got you.
thank you so
Hey,
much,
let me do
Troy.
this. Look, if you guys are, let me just do this. If
Yeah,
somebody
show your
screenshot or
slide and how they
whatever,
can get a hold of you. Yeah.
yeah, right here. I'm cooking, Mike. You know I'm getting there, man. Y'all just got me rolling. I'm so excited right now.
It it reminded me of when we used to work together and we would say, Troy has had his coffee or
Yeah, but you
Mike
know,
has had
coffee
his
right now, I
coffee.
like I tell you, you can't burn that. You can't burn out if you've never been on fire. But if you are getting tired, make sure you can renew energy by doing something that feeds your soul. Y'all, thank you for an opportunity to feed my soul today. This is
Thank you,
absolutely
Troy.
essential. Thank y'all.
You are awesome, Troy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah, and get a
everyone.
hold of Troy.
Absolutely get a
Troy
hold of
Kemp
them.
speaks.
And you
And
can go on my Instagram or something, follow. I got a lot. You ask questions you didn't get a chance to ask. I'll be happy to answer them. I apologize, y'all. I'm Baptist, y'all. Y'all know our church is going to go long. Come on.
I like it. You're awesome. Thank
absolutely.
you.
We are going to all transition to our very next session. So please log out and I'll see you on the other side. I'll be in touch, Troy. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Thank you.
I will too, Troy. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.